Hello, everyone. We are going to give it just a couple more seconds here as more people continue to join the webinar, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Well, depending on where you are joining us from, either good afternoon or good morning, or if you are listening to this recording later on, maybe even good evening, but it's great to have you all with us today to dive into a very important topic, which we have spent time on in past webinars, but certainly is even more relevant today with what we all have been going through over the past 11 months with this pandemic. My name is Michelle Marchand. I serve as the Senior Director of Chapter Development for Delta Upsilon Fraternity. My role at the fraternity headquarters, I supervise our chapter development team, helping to set the strategy and goals for how we service and support our undergraduate chapters, particularly how we manage our partnerships with our colleges and university campuses that we work with. But one of my most enjoyable aspects of my job is getting to work with all of you, getting to oversee and manage our advisor and volunteer training and support initiatives. So it's always great. I know you get plenty of emails from me throughout the course of the year, but it's always great when I get to actually come in and facilitate one of these webinars and see these familiar names popping up on the screen today. So thank you all for being here. On the topic of mental health, I always want to point out that I am not personally a mental health expert. While I do have my master's degree in college student development, it's been about 14 years since I took those 2 counseling classes as part of my degree. So this is not my own personal area of expertise, but certainly something that, having worked with fraternities and sororities over the past 14, 15 years, and especially over the last about 9 years with Delta Upsilon, this is something that has been a topic of conversation with chapters, with officers, advisors. It only continues to increase in both concern, but also in just the ability to put it out in the open and have these conversations on mental health. I also think it's important to share a warning for everybody on the call today, just that some of the information, the research and statistics that we'll be talking through could certainly be troubling or difficult to hear, especially if you or someone close to you has gone through or is going through similar challenges. Advisors are certainly not immune to needing support in this area. And so certainly encouraging you to also seek out resources and mental health professionals to assist in your personal journey. I think we hear this in a lot of different settings, but we can't help others if we aren't first taking care of ourselves. And that's certainly in this setting as well. All right, so I am going to jump into our slides for today. We do have the question box and the chat box open on the side. I will try to monitor those as we go, but give me a little grace in that I am the only person on the back end. So it may take me a little bit to catch up on if a question or chat item is dropped in that box. All right, so let's talk pre-pandemic. Where were we before coronavirus, before COVID-19 changed our worlds? It's important for us to understand the scope of college student mental health prior to all of this happening, so that we know how that has impacted this already challenging situation. Certainly over the last 10 years, there has been an increased attention by colleges on the topic of mental health, but we're also seeing society in general open up to these conversations on mental health and really breaking down the barriers of what was once truly hidden side conversations and silent whispers of what could be going on with different people. That has really changed a lot in the last 10 years. And it's good. It's good that we have brought these topics out into the open and feel more comfortable discussing mental health just like we would any other type of health issue. A lot of the research that I'm going to be sharing here and throughout the program comes from the Healthy Minds Network in conjunction with Active Minds and the JED Foundation. And I'll share a references slide at the end if you're interested in pulling up any of that information afterwards. So let's look at some research that was done between 2009 and 2019 on a few mental health areas. Depression in college students. Back in 2009, 23% of college students reported experiencing some level of depression. So that could be mild to moderate to severe. Look at how that number increased up to 36% of college students in 2019. Again, all pre-pandemic in that impact. Similar increases in anxiety. 17% of college students back in 2009 reporting that they experienced moderate or severe levels of anxiety. And then 10 years later, that number increasing to 31% of college students. And what we know is that depression and anxiety are negative predictors of students' academic persistence, their retention in college, as well as their GPA. So students who screen at risk for depression are twice as likely to leave college without graduating. So these two areas certainly already on the radar of colleges prior to the pandemic even taking place. Another important data point here is suicidal ideation. And the increase that we're seeing there from 7% of students reporting suicidal ideation over the past year back in 2009 to 14% in 2019. And suicidal ideation is being described or defined as seriously thinking about attempting suicide. And so these three data points on their own, adding in that pandemic over the past 11 months that we're dealing with is really leading us to a perfect storm in terms of the mental health crises that many of our students are currently going through. Also want to share, I thought this was interesting. There is a scale out there, Diner's Flourishing Scale. And the scale measures a student's self-perceived success in areas such as relationships, self-esteem, purpose, optimism. So they decide for themselves, do I consider myself flourishing right now? Do I have good self-esteem? Do I have positive relationships? Do I have purpose? Am I optimistic about my future? Well, 10 years, 11 years ago, 57% of students said yes, like I am flourishing right now. I'm defining myself as flourishing in some level, and how that number has dropped to 40% in 2019, again, prior to the pandemic even happening. It'll be interesting to see what that research finds on the flourishing scale in the next year and where students are placing themselves. And then finally, it's important to also highlight that students within the LGBTQ community, they were already experiencing more mental health issues at higher rates, more than half, 52%, showing some mental health symptoms prior to the pandemic. And additionally, students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, about 42% of them experiencing mental health symptoms pre-pandemic. I think it's important to have that information in mind before we even talk about the impact of COVID-19. Like this quote here, even before the emergence of the novel coronavirus, US college students struggled with depression, anxiety, and other mental health disorders at higher rates than the general population. Now, it is important to point out that college students are generally prone to stress, anxiety, and depression. When you factor in the strain of living away from home for the first time for many of them, maintaining and forming new relationships with peers, professors, worrying about completing classwork on time, all of that can feel overwhelming. So it's not surprising that students already have higher levels of these issues than others. But research also shows that mental health issues are prevalent among non-college students in that same age range. So in that traditional college age, student age range, 18 to 23 years old, growing into adulthood, finding their way in society, it can be difficult for all young people, regardless of if they are in college or not. But the increases in mental health issues over the past 10 years can certainly be attributed to other things as well. Social media, 24/7 connectivity. Anytime we have talked about Generation Z and the impact of being connected to each other, connected to the world at all times, that certainly plays into creating more challenges here. And also increasingly high expectations from parents, from teachers, from peers to meet some level of perfection. Despite all of those opportunities for connection in the digital world, even back in 2017, 63% of college students reported feeling very lonely in the last year. And that concept of loneliness is going to come up even more so as we get into some of the pandemic implications. So what have we learned so far? If you can imagine, I think we've all probably had this moment over the past couple of weeks of where were we a year ago? January 2020, February 2020, we were just really starting to hear about this coronavirus, this potential epidemic, which then turned into a pandemic. It was new information, right? And how quickly things changed. By March 20th of 2020, all of the campuses in which Delta Upsilon has a chapter had moved to either shutting down the campus, remote learning. They extended their spring breaks as they figured out what to do with students and what to do to be able to finish that term, the semester, the quarter, whatever it might be, and how quickly that all changed. So we know isolation. One of the things we've learned a lot over the past year. Previous research has shown that students with lower quality social support were 6 times more likely to experience mental health problems than students who had high quality social support. Thinking about some of the students most affected or most at risk for mental health conditions are the hardest to reach because they're secluded in their rooms. Isolation being that major impediment to connecting with some of the most at-risk students. For students who are taking their courses online now, who maybe aren't allowed to really leave the chapter house or the building that they're living in, you know, with exceptions for grocery shopping and you know, a doctor's visit or things like that. It's easier than ever to withdraw and avoid others. And so thinking about with the concept of isolation, how can our chapter leaders, how can our advisors be extra tuned in to those members who aren't engaging, even in online or virtual settings? What else have we learned? Academics. So the Healthy Minds Network, again, and the American College Health Association, where a lot of this data and research is coming from, they just so happened in fall 2019 to survey students about the impact of mental health on their academic performance. So in fall 2019, 22% of students reported that their mental health was negatively impacting their academic performance. Well, they resurveyed those same students at the end of spring 2020, and that number was now 31% of students reporting that their mental health was negatively impacting their academic performance. I found this particularly interesting too. There was some research done in the STEM fields, so science, technology, engineering, math. That research being done by Chemical and Engineering News. They indicated an increase in challenges for students, particularly in STEM majors, where their coursework was requiring in-person research, lab work, projects, things that really need some hands-on interaction between professors and peers. And the impact that that was having, not just on the students' ability to learn and grasp new information, but to build the skills necessary to take an internship or to get a job in engineering, in science, in technology, something that you have to be able to do in some hands-on capacity versus just learning on a screen. So certainly the impact on academics continues to be seen. An interesting anecdote is the fraternity, our overall chapter GPA performance in spring 2020 jumped nearly 0.3. So what happened last spring is we saw so many universities allow students to switch to pass-fail classes. And so that pass-fail class versus actually receiving a grade on a 4-point scale led a good number of our members to have much better GPAs in the spring. And so it'll be interesting. We're just now starting to get grade reports from chapters for fall 2020, and most universities stepping away from that pass-fail option in the fall, unlike what they did last spring. So it'll be interesting to see the true impact of academic performance in the fall when there wasn't that safety net per se with the quick switch to online learning like what happened in the spring versus the entire fall being those remote or hybrid classes for so many of our students. So more information to come there on the DU specific side. What else have we learned? Lost work, internships, and an uncertain job market. So we know that students struggle most when they lack a sense of hope or possibility. And financial stress in general is already a known predictor of student mental health. More students and families are struggling to cover their tuition, part of that being impacted by the job market for parents or family members that are maybe helping them through college, but also on the actual students themselves who don't have the same opportunities for part-time work, work study on campus, things like that they had traditionally relied on to help them have their needs met. On the topic of basic needs, more college students indicated in the past 6 months that they've struggled to afford some basic needs than before. And I think in reading that and considering it from an advisor perspective, how important it is to have a pulse on your chapter's membership, particularly those students that may come from either lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Maybe they are less inclined to discuss some of those struggles because they don't want the extra attention from others. They just want to think everything's okay. So the importance of advisors being able to have that pulse and understanding of what's going on in the undergraduate membership. But then also just in general, students, their future earning potential, their job offers being harmed by the pandemic. Less students having jobs secured before graduation. Many members of the class of 2020 who are not working in the field that they had intended to because offers were canceled or rescinded back in spring 2020. And then similar on the internship side, internships either being canceled or internships being moved to a virtual setting, which you can certainly still learn from and you can certainly still gained some good experience from a virtual internship setting, but students saying how much they're missing out on the in-person interaction and growth that occurs from, you know, being in that big office environment for the first time and seeing how professionals interact with each other in a business setting or a engineering setting or whatever it might be, missing out on some of those day-to-day pieces that they pick up and learn and will be able to take into their full-time job someday. Increased alcohol use. So as most of you know, Delta Upsilon has worked with dyad strategies over the past 5 years with our annual membership outcomes assessment. We administer our survey every February, so chapters will actually be getting information about that over the next week as we get so close to February here. But some of dyad's other fraternity headquarter clients administer their version of the survey in the fall. And so as such, dyad now has some preliminary data on the impact of COVID-19 specific to fraternity chapters. 3 fraternities, international national fraternities that have worked with dyad for the last 3 academic years just did their most recent surveys in October and November of 2020. And so we're all the groups that are in this sort of consortium of fraternities that work with dyad, we're all getting the first sort of drafts and information on some of that data now. And one of the more concerning data points that is emerging is the impact of binge drinking. So we know that binge drinking is defined as 5 or more drinks in the span of about 2 hours. So dyad works with 12 fraternity clients. For all 12 of those fraternity clients, binge drinking has steadily declined every year since 2016. Great news, except now that we're getting some of this fall 2020 data in, which is representing the first increases in self-reported binge drinking in nearly 5 years. So the pattern from the fall data is really clear at this point that fraternity members are drinking significantly more, and there's concerns that they're moving further into alcohol dependency. So it is hard to not attribute that to the pandemic. And anecdotally, we're hearing similar things from our chapter members as well, particularly chapters that maybe they're allowed to be on campus, but they can't have any real social outlets. And so individual members turning to drinking in their rooms by themselves or with 1 other, 2 other guys to excess because there's no other outlet for them. So like I said, we will be doing the Delta Upsilon version of that survey starting on February 8th, and we'll be able to share our own specific data later this year, and then also all of the other fraternities beyond the 3 that did it in the fall, and how all of that breaks out and compares. So certainly more information to come there, but be aware that that is a reality. Increased stress. So Clemson University did a study back in the fall of 2,500 students at 7 public universities across the United States. 85% of the students surveyed experienced high to moderate levels of stress, in which they attribute directly to the pandemic. The increases in stress were particularly prevalent in students under age 25, which is the vast majority of DU undergraduates' age. Those students who are in poor health, students from lower income backgrounds, and students who personally knew someone with COVID-19. Additionally, risk factors in the increased stress were also increased in students who spent 8 or more hours each day in front of a computer, smartphone, or TV screen, which we know the vast majority of our our members are experiencing, because they are taking their classes online. They are in front of their phone. They might have their TV going on at the same time. They could have 3 or 4 screens up at the same time, and the impact of how that increases their stress. However, there is a little bright spot, that of the 15% of students in that survey that didn't report high or moderate levels of stress, amongst those 15% of students, they were more likely to be spending 2 or more hours outdoors each week. So just a real interesting perspective there on perhaps the benefit of encouraging members to get outside, to get out of their environment in their room or in their house and just get some fresh air, how something simple like that actually could help in this situation. And then finally, wanting to also add in about the exacerbation or the attention of other societal issues. So 2020 was not an easy year, even if you take the pandemic out of it. Thinking about the impact of the political environment, racial injustice, campus unrest, all of these pieces they're already weighing heavily on the minds of students. Additionally, some of the research pointed out, and I really like this quote here, that I worry about the students we're not seeing because they're in a situation where either they literally don't have the privacy, or they're in a home where family members may not be supportive or believe in counseling. And that coming from somebody who works in counseling at the University at Buffalo. But we know that for some students, going away to college can be an escape from a difficult home or family environment. And with some campuses being closed or housing not being an option, some students have had to return to not so great households and home environments, particularly some that may be unsympathetic to pursuing counseling, talking about mental health or well-being. Those kind of places where you just hear someone say, "Oh, suck it up, you'll be fine." That's not what our students need to hear right now. Another challenge with the home environment piece, particularly for students that are living in those real big COVID-19 hotspots, where we see this with DU chapters. We have some chapters that are pretty much operating not normal, but close to normal, because their campus geographically is not somewhere where there's as much of a issue as you are seeing in other places like Southern California. And so for students that in some locations, they are also feeling that very real threat to their own health, or maybe they might be okay away at school, but their family or friends are back home in some of those hot spots, or are working in essential worker roles where they are family members are more likely to be exposed to the virus. One of the research pieces from back to that STEM research from Chemistry and Engineering News, they just had an anecdote from a student there who shared the experience of losing her 23-year-old cousin to COVID-19, and the reality that this can impact college students. It's not just something that can impact those that are older or not in great health situations. So all of that being said, how can we help now? Everything that we've learned about the pandemic, what can we actually do? So the University of Michigan Medicine, their Department of Psychiatry, recommended the following 5 tips for college students managing the pandemic today. I think these 5 tips are really easy ones to talk to our students about. So particularly as advisors, sharing directly these 5 pieces. 1, knowing that it is okay to feel how you are feeling. All of our students have had some feelings of sadness, of anger, frustration, anxiety, all of the above, and we have as well. So as the older people in the room most of the time, or those with more experience, it's important for us to remind our members that they're allowed to feel this way. And it's important for them to communicate those feelings with others, and to be okay with sitting in those feelings too, and recognizing like there is a global pandemic going on. I am allowed to be sad. I'm allowed to be angry. I'm allowed to be frustrated. That is expected in this situation. The second tip that the University of Michigan recommended to students is maintaining a routine. Now, as much as that's possible, we know that this can be challenging for college students, but things like trying to start your day at the same time. So getting on that regular, I'm gonna get up, I'm gonna do my coursework, I'm gonna go to my class or participate online. I'm gonna make sure I have adequate nutrition. So maybe not eating the leftover pizza for breakfast, the leftover pizza for lunch, and a new pizza for dinner. I'm going to try to work in some other maybe green things into that routine. Trying to get at least some physical activity in each day. We talked about that with the survey of students who spent at least 2 hours outdoors each week. Encouraging our chapters and our members to plan outdoor activities, even when it's cold, going out and taking a walk around campus or a hike at a nearby park. That can go a long way in supporting our students' mental health and well-being. The third tip that they recommended, and I did laugh a little bit at this one because we're talking about college students, so telling them to practice good sleep hygiene is kind of humorous, but it's true. And we know that when students have adequate sleep, they're going to be able to function better. They're going to be able to remember their homework or classwork, things that they need for the quiz. But especially thinking about our chapters that are still living in a chapter house environment, what are things we can do there to actually encourage healthy sleep? So quiet hours in the house, actually enforcing quiet hours, putting phones on do not disturb. We know our chapters love their group me's, and those can be going all night. And so put your phone on do not disturb so you can wake up in the morning and see those notifications and not just get the dings going off on your phone all night long. The fourth thing they recommended is connecting with others. Going back to that piece about isolation a couple slides ago, it's easier now than ever to quickly feel lonely and secluded from others. And so there's a great opportunity here for fraternity chapters where this is one of the things we're supposed to be about. So how can we pair up members or utilize big brothers, little brothers, pre-existing relationships? A lot of our chapters are already doing a great job with scheduling regular group chats or using Discord or Zoom or whatever it might be. But making sure we're connecting with others and keeping an eye out for those members that aren't connecting and figuring out how to reach them. And then finally, the fifth one they recommended is taking a break. Reminding our students and our members that it's important to take time for themselves each day. So that could be stepping away from your phone, stepping away from the news, taking a break from homework, doing something that they find relaxing or rejuvenating, or even taking a nap. That can all help. How else can we help? Peer support. So the Healthy Minds Network research shows that students already turn to their peers for support when they're struggling, and that the better equipped college students are to recognize distress, the faster that person can support their peer and connect them to the appropriate resources. The good news, according to Healthy Minds, is that 90% of college students think that they have a pretty good idea of how to recognize when someone is in emotional or mental distress. And part of that has to come from the fact that we are talking about mental health so much more now than just 10 years ago. And so students are more familiar with talking about it, with noticing when somebody's just not his usual self. But the key part of that peer support is making sure our members are initiating and facilitating those conversations about warning signs and how to reach out when you first notice that someone is struggling versus waiting until they're actually in a crisis situation. Chapter action. So two key pieces here that chapters can do to help. One, we've seen a number of our chapters start to add chair positions and committees related to wellness and mental health, which is fantastic. Just having that person or that group who their responsibility is to be thinking about this and talking about this can go a long way in creating that supportive environment within the chapter. So that has turned into things like weekly open discussion time, you know, where chapter members know, okay, Tuesdays at 8 o'clock, this is our open discussion time. You can come to it, you don't have to, but the time is specifically set aside for brothers to gather and talk. And it can be on whatever topic comes up. It could be well-being, it could be mental health, whatever it might be, but having that set time for them. But also for those committees and chair members, planning activities. So sometimes in conjunction with the Brotherhood chair, the Brotherhood committee, sometimes separately. But what are those opportunities you've already talked about to get outside? Also things like planning speakers, watching a movie together and talking about it afterwards, especially some movies that tackle the challenges of mental health. Those can be great opportunities. Additionally, we do have a couple chapters that have started creating kind of like small information forms. So many of our chapters use Google Drive to share chapter documents and meeting minutes and things like that. And so adding in a simple Google form where members can fill it out real quick if they noticed somebody having a difficult time and wanting to put it on the radar of chapter officers and advisors. Not intended to be a crisis reporting thing, but certainly just hey, I noticed this, I heard this. I think I just want to make sure others know that, this guy, Jimmy over here is maybe really struggling with some of his classes, or he's got some family issues going on, and I just want other people to be aware of it without having to call it out in the middle of a chapter meeting. I will put the caveat there that if chapters decide to do something like a form like that it's important to have an advisor engaged in that too. So there's just an additional layer should something be shared in one of those forms that really needs to be elevated beyond the undergraduate level, or perhaps needs to be shared with the university or something like that. So that would be the caveat to it. But the intent there for our chapters, they really have the best intentions of wanting to make sure members have that place to talk about who they're worried about and how they can best support him. Campus engagement. So we certainly know that campuses all have counseling centers and opportunities for students on those campuses to engage with the mental health counselors. Those counseling centers have reported an increase in demand throughout the past 10 years. So not just during the pandemic, but certainly beforehand as well. But a study from the University of Michigan conducted last spring of 2020, said 60% of students said the pandemic made it harder to access mental health care. So it's important as advisors to know what are the options on campus, what are the options virtually. Many colleges and actually states and provinces have relaxed some regulations that previously prohibited university counseling centers from providing mental health across state lines. So like, for example, if a student goes to school in Colorado but lives in California and is taking their classes remotely in California, there may have been something that prohibited the counselors in Colorado from meeting virtually with a student who is in California. I don't know if that's actually the case for those two states, just using it as an example, but many of those regulations have been relaxed due to the pandemic to make sure that students have that mental health support and counseling more accessible to them, even in a virtual environment. Also, most universities have some sort of concerned student form on their websites. So something where anybody can really submit a concern about a student so that the university is aware. That could be mild, so maybe somebody's concerns about academic performance, to much more severe if they're hearing a student talk about suicidal ideation, for example. You can fill out that form and it will be shared with the university's risk and behavior assessment teams, where those teams are intentionally designed to swoop in to provide that direct support and resources to students who are struggling across the spectrum of problems that college students struggle with. So certainly encouraging our advisors to find that opportunity on your university websites and know what's available and what are those next steps. It's also important to know some of the barriers that keep students from seeking help. 23% of students identify a barrier as simply not having enough time, that between classwork, internship, taking care of chapter activities, whatever it might be, feeling like they don't have enough time to actually think about their own mental health and well-being. Financially, 15% of college students saying that finances are a barrier to getting help. Now, the vast majority, all colleges and universities do offer counseling services on their campuses, but sometimes that's not an option for some students that they want to pursue. And so we know that accessing mental health support outside of those environments can certainly be costly, especially if you factor in health insurance challenges as well. 10% of students said one of their barriers is not knowing about the available resources to them. And so I see that as that's an easy fix for chapters, right? This is something that we can share this information in a chapter meeting and make sure members know what is available to them. And then finally, 9% of students shared that it's difficult to find an available appointment. And that's very valid because more students than ever are seeking assistance from counseling centers, and counseling centers at universities are adding more and more staff to help accommodate that, but it can certainly be a challenge to find available appointments sometimes. Wanted to share a couple of external resources before we wrap up here. Really like some of the work and information you can find on Seize the Awkward. It's a website put together by the Jed Foundation, and really just the concept of like, hey, it can be awkward to have some of these conversations about mental health, but like, let's seize it. So let's seize the day with the awkwardness and accept it and figure out how to help our friends and how to help our chapter brothers in these situations. So check out that website for some resources. To Write Love on Her Arms, and Because I Said I Would, also have a lot of information, particularly for college students. And then of course, the National Alliance on Mental Illness has a vast array, not just for college students, but across the board on all things mental health related. I did want to point out a couple DU resources. So pre-pandemic, we put together 3 new resources just about a year ago that you can find on the chapter resources page of the website. Those could be used as discussion guides in a chapter meeting or in one of those wellness committee discussion groups, something like that, just to review this information with the chapter and let it be a conversation starter about how do we talk about mental health? What are things we should look for? What's important, particularly with college men? So 3 things to check out on our website. And then I'll also put a plug in for RLA. So we have the two virtual regional leadership academies coming up on February 6th and February 13th. Both days are identical programming. So since we're not doing 5 geographically spread RLAs this year, we're offering 2 different virtual RLA options. And so there will be 2 breakout sessions that dig into some of these pieces, one on difficult conversations, one on mental health and wellness. And then there will also be some open discussion time towards the end of each of those days. And one of the topics in that open discussion time will be mental health. And so all the students participating in those will be able to pick and choose what sessions they want to participate in. I got a question to go back to there's those websites again, if you want to take a quick screenshot of them. As a reminder too, all of our advisor webinars are always recorded and posted on the DU website afterwards. So you'll be able to access this again. Getting forward here just to our last, so references. These are some of the references from today's program if you have any interest in reading some of those particular articles or research items that were shared throughout the conversation today. I also would put a plug in going back to the RLA conversation next I can't believe we're almost a week away, but next Saturday, February 6th, and again, February 13th, running at the same time as RLA, we will have Advisors Academy. So there will be 3 breakout sessions during RLA where our members will have a chance to pick which breakout sessions they want to go to based upon their position or the interest area. And at the same time, we will have 3 breakout sessions for chapter advisors as well. So if you're interested, great opportunity this year with things being virtual, don't have to travel anywhere, don't have to spend the night in a hotel, pop in with us for a couple of hours next Saturday or the Saturday after. Happy to address any questions that we have right now. Trying to see if we had any questions come up over here. Let's see. I think got those answered, so we might be all set. Like I said, part of my role here with Delta Upsilon is working specifically with our advisors and volunteers. And so if there's something we talked about during today's webinar that you'd love to chat about afterwards, feel free to send me an email and we can get something scheduled. My email is my last name, marchand @deltau.org. And happy to get that set up. But as always, appreciate you all being part of the conversation today and look forward to seeing many of you at Advisors Academy over the next couple of weekends. Hope you have a great rest of your Thursday. Thanks, everyone.